Hello, Laziali all over the world. Welcome to another episode of Lazio Lounge this week to go through everything that's just happened at the Olimpico tonight in a game that, again, unfortunately, we're having to review and not be particularly happy about. Now, those of you who listen regularly will have already noticed that something's a bit wrong. That's because it's me, Alasdair Mackenzie, and I'm afraid I'm flying solo tonight because Vittorio Campanile is away enjoying himself on a holiday, having a much-deserved break. You will be relieved to hear that you can find out what he's got to say about this game. He's uploaded a shorter video on his own YouTube channel, so if you search for Vittorio Campanile, you'll be able to find that as well. But thankfully, we've had plenty of feedback, unsurprisingly, from our followers after the game tonight. And so I'll be able to have a kind of virtual conversation with you going through the various points that have been flagged up. So I thought the best place perhaps to start with this is by having a look at some of the numbers, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page about exactly what happened here. It doesn't make for great reading. Possession overall, Lazio had 58% on average during the game. 22 shots to Sassuolo's 5 on target. Lazio had 7 shots to Sassuolo's 2. And yes, that means that with both of Sassuolo's shots on target, they scored. Lazio had 11 corners today to Sassuolo's 1. We've actually got someone who's mentioned the set pieces, so I think we'll come back to that one a bit later on, but it's a big shame. I haven't been around the last couple of episodes, unfortunately, but you can rest assured was not very happy on Wednesday night either about what happened up in Ferrara in the Spal game. And yeah, this I suppose was just a perfect opportunity on paper to sort things out after that, because Sassuolo are almost the ideal opposition at this stage of the season. They're mid-table, they're not really in any danger of relegation, but any hopes of European qualification have gone. And yeah, it was a nice atmosphere heading to the game today. It was very bright sunshine. Everyone seemed in a very happy mood. It was a good crowd. I didn't see actually in the end the total attendance figure, but I'd probably guess around somewhere between kind of 36 and 40,000, which is above average for this season. And then before the game, you had Juan Sebastian Veron running around. He was presented. He's been back at Formello this week and visiting his old club, and was presented with a shirt. The crowd got very engaged with him being back and singing his name, and he went under the Curva Nord, and yeah, it was all very nice. So I think basically what I'm trying to say is leading into this game, you basically had everything you'd want, I suppose. It was the right opposition, it was a home game, it was a good time, a good crowd and a good atmosphere, and everyone seemed right on board with it. So the scene was really set for what should have been, in the end, given the numbers we've talked about, a pretty comfortable win. I'll say at this point, before I continue, I am struggling with a bit of a cold at the moment. You might have noticed my voice is a little bit husky, so I might have to take a few kind of sniff and drink stops as we go along. There's the first one. Right. So, first big topic of the night that we need to get onto, Ciro Immobile. Now, Immobile is someone we've discussed a lot, obviously. He is the fan favourite, everyone loves Ciro. What he's done for this club has been absolutely phenomenal over the last couple of seasons, 2.5 seasons. There's no way around that. I mean, he's a club legend already, basically. But that doesn't mean he's immune to criticism when it's due, and unfortunately that time has come for old Ciro. And I actually wrote an article earlier this week about Immobile's struggles to get back to the level he was at even at the start of this season, pointing out the fact that he has set the bar a bit too high for himself by being so good in his first 2 seasons that a lot's expected of him now. But it's more worrying when you see him in open play, for me, the fact that his touches are clumsier than they were, his finishing isn't as accurate as it was, his movement isn't as good, he's being caught offside a lot, which something a few people have picked up on. And tonight, it was a strange game for him, because anyone who just looks at games on paper will see a 2-2 draw with Immobile having scored one and assisted one, which I suppose by anyone's standards is a good day at the office, some good work well done. But that wasn't really the case if you watch the 90 minutes, I'm afraid. Obviously, his assist at the end was absolutely vital, and I don't want to hang him out to dry or crucify him for being the reason that this happened tonight, because it's a bit more complex than that. But there is no doubt that the 2 chances in particular he got, one of which was getting on the end of a through ball from Correa and having his shot saved by Concili, and the other of which was when the ball kind of came over his shoulder and he hit it with his left foot and he hit it wide. And let me just say, I mean, the disbelief around me in the stadium at that point was palpable at that chance in particular. So I'm just going to read out a couple of, well, we've got a few comments I suppose here. Let's start with Tiamat has come in to say, something's not clicking, the team has immense talent, Ciro is world class but something is not right and he's missed a lot. I can't complain. It's taken over the million others we've seen over the years except Klose. And Inzaghi needs to work on the mental issues, probably. One more, Owalabi Lalakan Gabriel has said, how could Ciro Immobile miss such a chance? Apart from that, how did he become a player that can't stay in the right position in the box? A brilliant player in the box before becomes one string offside anyhow. And Christopher Thomas has also chipped in saying, clinical finishing by Sassuolo is something we lack right now. I don't think these misses will do Ciro's confidence any good either, just at the time when he needs a boost. So yeah, I think I want to pick up on a couple of points raised in there. In particular, I think the one there mentioned by Christopher Thomas, but also in the first comment, is about the mentality with Ciro. And the same goes for a lot of footballers, of course, but particularly strikers, is that it's very much a confidence job. His confidence is clearly left him at the moment. Some people have tried to point the finger at his international break with Italy as being perhaps a reason for that. We all know, the Lazio fans anyway, how unfairly he is treated often by the Azzurri fans who don't watch him with Lazio or don't rate him because they see him in an Italy shirt for 45 minutes every 3 months and make up their mind that way. But although I don't think that will have helped, because again he ended up being getting hammered for his performance against Finland in the international break this time round. I wouldn't go as far as to say that's the only thing, because for me his poor form has stretched way before then, to be honest. 2019 in general has been a bad year for him, and a lot of his goals that are coming from the penalty spot, like the one tonight, and in open play he's been a shadow of the player that we saw last season. So when talking about how could he miss such a chance, well, I think a lot of him must be just simply that that's preying on him, and he has so much credit in the bank with the fans that, look, there was no trace whatsoever in the stands today of the fans getting on his back or of him being booed or anything like that. He's done more than enough by now to earn the time to turn this around, and the fans aren't going to start criticising him for going on a bad run of form. These things happen. Again, going back to the original point, I would say that the thing that makes this stand out, even it stands out for us above anything else, is simply that Immobile's not really had a dip in form like this in 2.5 seasons, and that's incredible. His consistency has been incredible. His rate of scoring has just been unstoppable. He's been unbelievably prolific, and that's I suppose the right word to use, because it is unbelievable. It's not realistic to expect a player to constantly score with that rate that he has been for Lazio for 2.5 years. So we have to support him through this as fans and make sure that we get him back to the player that he once was, because he is lacking that quality right now. in terms of the suggestion of Inzaghi needing to work on the mental issues, I don't really see what Inzaghi can do more than what he has, because Inzaghi continues to select him, and this was a point I made in my articles, that Ciro at least has, if he is dealing with the anxiety of not being on his best form or finding goals a bit harder to come by, I do acknowledge that he scored today, but again from a penalty, then at least he is being backed by his coach. His coach is always going to select him. You might argue that that's a bad thing. Perhaps he needs the pressure of somebody else coming up behind him, putting pressure on him to bring out the best in him. I'm not sure that's the of his coach. He knows that he's got the backing of the fans, and so for me it's really up to him, because not an awful lot has changed around him. The system has remained more or less the same. Obviously the Fantasia Lazio has become a slightly different shape and a different way of constructing the play, but if anything that should benefit a centre forward more than the team he played in last season. And a lot of it has really just been, like I say, lack of attention sometimes. With the offsides we've talked about, lack of attention there, clumsy touches, things like this is just his focus. And when it gets to a moment where he needs to let that striker's instinct take over and put away the chance, I think he's probably thinking about it a bit too much. That's the impression I get from watching him. So we'll see. I think he needs, in my mind, one brilliant game to at least get him back on track. And unfortunately, despite the goal and the assist, that wasn't it tonight. Rami Elgendi said that he disagrees with Vittorio, that Ciro is the reason why we won't get the Champions League this season. I didn't realise that Vittorio said this, so I disagree too. It hasn't been the best of years for him, but it isn't his fault, because if so, then whose fault was it last year, when he was on his own winning us games? And yeah, that's exactly the point, Rami. The fans are very much on his side because they're aware of the fact that that's exactly what he was doing last season. And like I say, it's going to take a lot more than one bad game for everyone to turn on him. But again, I think it is crucial when we're talking about the Champions League. I think it's going to be absolutely crucial for Immobile to find his form again if this top four place is going to be achieved. And thankfully this season it looks like nobody wants to qualify for the Champions League apart from Juventus and Napoli. So we are still definitely in it, and yeah, that's something I'll get onto shortly as well. Just finally, before we move on from forwards, I thought Joaquin Correa was very good off the bench today. He made a big impact, obviously set up Immobile, but he's so direct, and it does remind you why he was used as an impact sub so much early on in the season, is that he can really cause problems to tiring defences. And given that Sassuolo were camped in their own half for pretty much the entire first half of the game and doing most of the defending the second half as well, they were flagging a bit by that stage. Milinkovic-Savic also came on, made a good impact, I think, because he just offers that aerial option. When you're needing a goal, when you're needing to throw numbers into the box, he's always a guy you can aim to. Obviously got that goal against Inter to win the game last week, and he almost got the same goal more or less tonight actually, but if it wasn't for a good save from Concealy, he would have got there. Something that Inzaghi was asked about in the press conference earlier on was about his decision to tinker with the team. Obviously he made a fair few changes to his lineup. He brought in Milan Badel, he brought in Marco Parolo, Stefan Radu was back in the team, Felipe Caicedo started up front. And the point he made was that, in retrospect, I suppose it's very easy to criticise him because it's not worked out. But actually, the team he did pick did more than enough, really, to get something from this game. And he said that they put in the performance he'd hoped for. And you can see where he's coming from, because they were utterly dominant in that first half. But again, it's just the same old problem of failing to first of all, create good chances from the amount of pressure being applied on the opposition, and secondly, being able to convert the ones that you do create. So these are the problems that have plagued Lazio throughout the season, and I think Inzaghi just needs these things, these small margins, to go his way a little bit more. One thing was quite interesting. Before the match, there was a lot being made of the fact that the next game for Lazio, as I'm sure everyone knows, is away to Milan, which is an absolutely massive game, needless to say, for the Champions League race. But there were 7 Lazio players in the squad today who were one booking away from being suspended for that game, and that includes a lot of guys we wouldn't want to miss: Strakosha, Lulic, Radu, Lucas Leiva, Luis Alberto. Thankfully, the only guy who picked up a booking during the game tonight who will be suspended was Milan Badel, who, I say thankfully because he's not a first choice, and Lucas Leiva would have been starting that game in any case. But then again, maybe we also want to say thankfully because of his performance tonight. Badel didn't have his greatest game. A bit of a shame because he had seemed to be picking things up when he was getting back in the team again recently, but no, I thought tonight he was a bit erratic. He lost the ball in dangerous areas. He was giving away a few sloppy fouls, including the one he got booked for, and yeah, when he was presented with shooting opportunities, they were pretty wild, to be fair. But he's not the only one when it comes to that last point anyway. Right, so what does the result mean? This is a big talking point. Champions League race, here we go, here's a few comments. El Polaco says, I can only say Champions League bye-bye. Patrick Bowman has said, we've lost 5 out of 6 points in the last 2 games. We can say we'll miss the Champions League now, anything else is just a foolish long shot. So I feel we live on borrowed time this season with a few players. After last season's Champions League miss, do you guys think there will be an exodus of players in the summer? Christopher Thomas, do you agree Champions League is gone now? We hear this talk about how we can't beat the top teams. This team can't even beat the lower teams. Why? We had it all for the taking in our own hands like last season. We failed to take advantage. Infuriating. I think a lot of people will share that feeling of the last comment. There's a few things in those comments though, and thanks for everyone who has been contributing them. I think first of all, I'll just start with my thoughts on the Champions League race, which are really, above all, that no, the Champions League isn't gone. It's definitely not gone. But one thing we can say for sure is that if Lazio don't sort themselves out immediately, because of the next game being against Milan, then it will be gone. Thankfully, as I've already mentioned, the teams around us are just as inconsistent and just as infuriating for their own supporters as Lazio have been. So if your focus is only on Lazio and not really on the league as a whole, it would be very easy to look at what's been going on and think that it's all gone. But these things can change very quickly. If we look at the league table now, Lazio down in 7th on 49 points. But the game in hand, we've been talking about forever now, because we're not getting to play it for another 10 days. But that game in hand will be at home to Udinese, another team at the bottom end of the league. Obviously, having just been through what we've been through today, we don't want to take that for granted by any means, but it is a good game in hand to have. It's a winnable game in hand. And if we do win that, that takes us up to 4th. That takes us level on points with Milan and Atalanta. So we're in a position now where, of course, the Champions League isn't gone, because not only is the table as tight as it is, but all the teams around us that we're vying with for this Champions League spot, Milan, Atalanta, Roma, Torino are down there as well. All these teams are having the same issues of consistency as Lazio have. So it's really up to us now to just turn this around as soon as possible. And in a way, although it might be a bit intimidating and a bit daunting, the fact that a away trip to AC Milan is next, that might be exactly what this team needs, because they've not only got the players to do a job, but they'll have the belief to do the job now, because we've just been to San Siro and got a result against their superior neighbours, Inter, if you're talking about the league this season anyway. Not only that, but there's nothing to fear from what we've seen from Milan so far this season. I've been at both of the games, the Coppa Italia game and the Serie A game. Both finished in draws, but Lazio were the dominant team in both games. And, there'll be a lot of people who aren't happy to hear that, but because it's still a draw at the end of the day, even if you are dominant, as we found out today. But I think that Lazio will go there with very little fear. And if they can get a result, get 3 points away to Milan and beat Udinese, that's how, this is what I'm saying about how quickly things can turn, because that can happen for us in the space of 3 days. That can happen, and then that would launch us into the Champions League spots. So I understand people's concerns. I understand why people think it's how did Patrick Bowman say, it's a foolish long shot to think that we might get there, but it's there. It's there for the taking. It's absolutely there. So there's no reason why any of those other teams should be a cause of fear for Lazio, given the form that they've been on, and that's what we need to bear in mind. Actually, Stephen Scarpula, there's another comment here, says if we make it fourth, it'll be because all the others around us have dropped points, which is okay by me. And yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Basically, is that Lazio don't necessarily have to be brilliant to finish in the Champions League spaces this year. That's a big difference. Lazio have to finish above as the best of a group of pretty average teams, and I think we all know that this version of Lazio this season has been far inferior to what we saw last season. But at the same time, football can be a strange sport, and seasons are different from the one before, and it might be enough for Lazio to find form at the right time, and get wins in the right results, and even finish with a lower points tally, and that could still be enough to get in the top four. So try not to give up hope, everyone. There's still a lot to be done here, and the fixture list is actually kinder to Lazio than a lot of our rivals as well, if you look at the teams we've got left to play. There are another couple of points in there. What was it? Yes, Christopher Thomas, we hear this talk about how we can't beat the top teams. This team can't even beat the lower teams. Why? Well, that's an interesting comment. I think that that's not really true, actually, on the whole. I think this season Lazio's trait in general has been more that we do beat the lower teams and have had struggles with the top teams. Certainly in the first half of the season, that was a very clear trait. Actually, going into this game, Gazzetta dello Sport today was pointing out the fact that Lazio at home were just brushing away these teams. In terms of the teams who are outside of the current ones, you'd say the top 9, I suppose, who are competing for European spots. So from Juventus to Sampdoria. When you look outside of that bracket and into the mid to lower table teams, Lazio played 7 of those teams and won every single game before tonight. And so this was the first time Lazio haven't taken maximum points against one of those teams in the kind of mid to low table. Obviously away from home, we've got games like Spal and Genoa, and yeah, that's been a frustration, but that's been more of a recent frustration. And this is the annoying thing, I suppose, and the infuriating thing, as you put it, is that at the point where we have started getting results against the big teams, knocking Inter out of the Coppa Italia and then beating them in Serie A, winning the Rome derby. Once those things start happening, we start losing to the small teams. So we're never going to get it quite right by the looks of things. But anyway, it's again, I'll finish off on the same note. It's not lost. It's still there. It's just up to Lazio to find the answers now. And there have been points this season where everyone's been similarly down on this team as they are now, and they responded by keeping themselves in it, and that's all we can really do when you're not playing well, is just keep yourself in the hunt, and here we are. It's an incredibly close race. As for Patrick Bowman's point, a few players living on borrowed time after last season's Champions League news, there'd be a bit of an exodus of players in the summer. Well, I think that depends a lot on what does happen by the end of this season. I think that there'll certainly be players going out the door. Yeah, I mean, there'll be guys. I think Wallace's time is up. For example, Jordan Lukaku is almost certainly going. But I think if a Champions League place is attained, then the way that we look at this entire mercato is very different than if it's another year of Europa League football. There's still obviously the option of missing out on European football altogether, which doesn't bear thinking about really, but is also an option. So I think those three scenarios would all come with very different mercato requirements, and yeah, I think that perhaps there is a need to inject a lease of new life in this team to a certain extent. I mean, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we haven't solved the same old problems. We still need Ciro Immobile. That's still a problem. I don't think Felipe Caicedo has really got a future role in this team. I'm happy to admit that he's played a far bigger part and been far more effective this season than he was last season, but he's still far from being a guy who gets you Champions League football. Again, the wing-backs is a position that we've talked about a lot. Marisic has improved recently. I don't think Romulo is necessarily what we want as a long-term option there. I think he's filled in the gap quite nicely this season on loan, but I'm not in love with the idea of signing him permanently. So the defence could still do with sorting out. Inzaghi has worked miracles really to turn Patrick into a centre-back and get this team to actually look like a decent defensive unit at times this season, considering the resources he's got at his disposal. So yeah, I think, to be honest, Patrick, I think we're going to have to wait and see a little bit with that one. I do agree that there are some players on borrowed time, but again, I think that the way that the club actually realistically is going to approach this transfer market completely depends on what they're looking at for next season, and that's obviously one of the most important things about getting this Champions League spot, is that it really opens the door into bigger investment in the market and being able to attract hopefully a different calibre of player. Right, moving on. Got a few more comments here. Gianni Di Franco has said that it's maddening, but yeah, he agrees about Immobile, but says if anyone deserves a pass, it's him. Azzurri has robbed him of his swagger. We've kind of gone through that already, but then he goes on to say, set pieces were absolutely wasted. Corners and free kicks too often produce zero. Goals conceded in the final 15 minutes are a result of poor fitness and focus. Inzaghi to blame there. Well, I'll start with the set pieces thing first. I absolutely agree with that. I think that's been a real disappointment for me this season, is that was a real weapon last season, and it's just not been utilised to the same effect this time around. Luis Alberto even, I think he's been absolutely tremendous recently, but even on his top form, he's still not quite managing to produce as many kind of, I suppose, set piece assists as he did last season. I said at the start of the show, where was it? Yes, corners, 11-1 today, 11 corners. And yeah, it's quite hard to remember any of note. I mean, obviously, I think the equaliser in the end started from a corner, not that you could really say it was produced by a corner necessarily. It's just, I think I would just like to see a bit of inventiveness. I'm a bit disappointed with Inzaghi with that, because far too often there was a classic Lazio corner routine last season. We saw it time and time again, and it's basically for the corner to come in and get a nod on near the front post, and Ciro Immobile would always be lurking at the back post, and he'd volley in or he'd get a scuff finisher. It was always Immobile at the back post, and that was always the play. That stopped really working this season. I think people may have finally worked it out. But other than that, it's quite hard to really think of any plays Lazio have got from these set pieces. Occasionally they'll take it short and try and run it up the line. They tried that once today, and Sassuolo were just out immediately, putting pressure on them, and they ended up going all the way back to the defence. And that infuriates me. I mean, a couple of things from corners infuriate me. One of them is doing that, and the other one is not beating the first man. But I was watching the Empoli game earlier on, Empoli Udinese, and Empoli's opening goal was a wonderful set piece routine. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend going and having a look at it. Benacer, who's capable of scoring from those set pieces outside the box, and everyone's kind of preparing for him to take the shot, and instead he plays a pass. One pass inside to a man on the edge of the box, another pass out to the wide channel where Caputo's there, and he just tucks his finish away, and Udinese looked stunned and basically didn't have time to react to what had happened. We're just not really seeing Lazio try these things. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any willingness to try and do anything other than lump the ball into the box and or play it short and just continue trying to do the whole threading the needle through the defence routine, which we know Lazio aren't particularly good at this season. So yeah, I'm 100% with you there, Gianni. I think that's a real disappointment that's not being made more of, especially because it does feel like Lazio just have to work so hard to score goals this season. It seems like we need absolute hatfuls of chances before the ball goes in the net. I remember earlier on this season seeing a statistic that Lazio, I think, had 11 point something shots per goal. So that's how many attempts on goal it took for them to actually score, which was one of the highest rates in Europe. But that was a few months ago. But I mean, it does tell you a story really of where we've been this season. As for the second point, the goals conceded in the final 15 minutes. Yeah, that's been very frustrating. Obviously, it's the most frustrating thing you can do is concede late goals. I don't know if it's about fitness though. I'm not quite with you on that one because I think that it did look like that a bit tonight, but also you have to remember that everyone is struggling a bit right now with the fixture pile-up that's been going on in Serie A. 3 game rounds within a week, and a lot of travelling as well. Lazio were up in Milan and then stayed up there and then went to Ferrara and just got back. So yeah, I think that the one thing I was surprised by was to see Lulic be the one to score the equaliser tonight, because I thought he looked absolutely knackered, and I made a note of that actually during the first half. And then there he was. He was the man on the line, just desperate to get the ball in the net, and that tells you a lot about the character that he is, Senad Lulic. So credit to him, he'll give you everything, every ounce of sweat, which is what we want. But no, I'm not too concerned about the fitness of this team, to be honest. I think that's reasonable. I don't think it's below the level of other teams so much, because we are also, you mentioned conceding goals in the final 15 minutes, but we are also scoring a lot of goals in the final 15 minutes. So I know it's tempting to say, oh, you're conceding goals late, that means you're unfit, but actually it's not always that simple. I think that the more likely explanation for me of why so much is happening towards the end of these games is that Lazio's games do tend to get a bit frantic towards the end, especially if the result is still in the balance. And I think that you can blame Inzaghi for if you want to. That these games do often become a bit too helter-skelter, a bit too open. Actually, that brings me on to another comment. We've got Greek Stav says, what is Lazio's plan of attack? What is Lazio's defensive strategy? Everything seems haphazard to me. Haphazard's a good word to use. I mean, especially when I'm talking about the end of these matches. I think far too often, and this is something I've talked about during the season, we've had the problem of when Lazio basically need a goal, caution is thrown to the wind a bit too much, and I think we saw that happen again tonight with the counter-attack goal that Sassuolo got. You shouldn't have the space that Berardi had. You shouldn't be offering players half a pitch to run into with quite so much ease. There is a way of throwing bodies forward to attack and to put pressure on teams, but actually be able to mop up. And also, if you're throwing bodies forward, you need to make sure that they're pressing and putting pressure on the opposition defenders so they can't just clear it and get it into that space so quickly. As for Lazio's plan of attack, well, in terms of the plan of attack and the defensive strategy, I think that the frustrating thing for me, above all, has been from what's happened in the last two matches, because up until that point, Lazio's strategy, both going forward and in defence, did seem to be quite clearly defined. I mean, it's been referred to over here as the Fantasia Lazio, in that Inzaghi's decided to play the two attack-minded midfielders and Alberto and Milinkovic in midfield, and then with two strikers up top. And that at its best has been phenomenal. I mean, the Parma game, the 4-1 win against Parma, 4-0 up at half-time, just absolutely blew them away. And then defensively, this team's actually been pretty good in this recent run defensively. We've kept clean sheets against Milan, Roma, Inter. This is the first time I saw in 7 matches that Lazio conceded 2 goals. So, I mean, the defence has been doing pretty well, actually. He's found this system he likes, and the reason Patrick's getting so much time in the team is that Patrick can actually get forward and play the ball out of defence, run the ball out of defence, and even join Marisic on the overlap and get forward and be an extra attacking weapon. And that's worked to good effect. That's what won Lazio the penalty today, was the Patrick getting in on the overlap, and teams just aren't set up with the numbers to deal with that. So Lazio have already got 2 strikers, one of whom tends to be a man on the shoulder in Immobile, and the other of whom is either Correa, who's floats around between the lines, carries the ball, or Caicedo, who's your link-up man, I suppose. And then you've got deep runners from midfield, you've got wing-backs, and then if your back 3 start getting involved in the attacks as well, then it's quite hard to defend against. So I think that the plan of attack has been pretty fruitful recently and has seemed to make a lot of sense. So that's what's been frustrating for me for the last couple of games against Spal and then today, is it's not been nearly as effective. And whether that's simply because we're playing against teams who are sitting deep and we're not able to break through them, or it's just because something's changed within this team, I can't say. But yeah, I wouldn't say that everything is haphazard in this team at all. I think that Inzaghi has taken his time in finding his strategy this season, and he has been a bit too laboured in doing that, in my opinion. But the one he's ended up with seems to be a relatively effective one, and very, very effective one on its day. But yeah, like I say, I think that towards the end of matches, when things aren't quite going the way we want, that's when it does get haphazard, gets far too loose, and maybe his striker's instincts kick in a bit too much, and that's what cost us, I suppose. Just on Inzaghi, I think that something he frustrated me a bit with today in the press conference was he talked about, Lazio didn't give anything away in this game. He says things like this, and yet we've conceded 2 goals. Often in matches when, there have been so many matches this season that Lazio have come away feeling like they should have won them. So often he comes away saying that he doesn't remember Thomas Strakosha making a save. Well, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if you can't remember these things, because something has gone horribly wrong if you're conceding goals despite dominating in that way. And it's a bit frustrating to me to hear him constantly say that, because surely he should be addressing that issue rather than feeling sorry for himself about it, because there was acres of space. Like I said, there's acres of space for Sassuolo to attack into today. Yes, the first goal was a bit fluky in a way because they had some ricochets go their way, but Lazio could have defended that better. Boga could have been stopped from getting to the byline quite easily. The ball could have been intercepted. Marisic could have been quicker to get in front of Ruggiero on the line. So there are all sorts of things you can do. It's not just bad luck. It's not just say, look at the numbers, we should have won this game. You need to be fully attentive all the time. So that was a bit frustrating to me. Massey comes in saying it's frustrating that in every match there are a few players who destroy the hard work of the team. Poor Ciro performance and Patrick, Radu and Badel made the team efforts useless. Yeah, well, I think it's a bit harsh to point out Patrick today. I think he was fine. Anyway, yeah, this is just the way things have been this season, though, isn't it? I mean, it's far too many individual errors, whether that's in attack or in defence, and that's just the way the game goes. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. If someone doesn't do their job well, 1 out of the 11 doesn't do their job well, that's enough for you to end up with a negative result, and that's been very costly. And that's some of the times I've sympathised the most with Inzaghi this season has been when things like this have happened, where you have individual mistakes, because there's not much you can do about that as a coach. You can't expect your player to feel the faith, feel trust from their coach, and then legislate for their being error prone by setting up the team around that. So yeah, it's a tricky one. We're almost done. Just before we do though, Vildan G. We seem to get one of these every week. What coach would be of interest for next season? I suppose Lotito will show the door to Inzaghi. Feels like he can't do much more than this. And he's offered Prandelli, De Zerbi and Gasperini. Right, well, I think regular listeners again will know my feelings about this. I think it's utterly ridiculous to have any sort of belief that one of those three guys is going to walk into this team and transform it from being a team it is right now, which is a team fighting for the Champions League places while getting through to knockout stages in Europe and going far in the Coppa Italia, transforming that into a team that doesn't even need to fight for the Champions League, that just walks into a Champions League space every year. Lazio haven't qualified for the Champions League for 11 years. So I don't know why people have this expectation that Inzaghi's not doing a good job. The only reason people have an expectation that Lazio should be in the Champions League is because of what Inzaghi's been doing since he's been at the club. He's the first one to bring a level of consistency. You might say Stefano Pioli did that, took us to third place. Well, yes, but then what happened the next season? I think that there's a lot to be said for the consistency Inzaghi is producing here. And on top of that, there's a lot to be said for the way he's got the best out of a lot of players in this team. He's created a project. I hate that word, but it's true. He's created a real harmony at this club. And if you look at clubs around us, like Roma, for example, is the best example. It's an absolute zoo over there. Basically, it's ridiculous. And then you've got Lazio, which is a very happy club in comparison. He creates a good harmonious atmosphere for his team. Look, he's a young guy. He's in his first job. That's not always going to be an excuse for him. But I think it's definitely in Lazio's interests to stick with him as long as possible, as long as he wants to be there for me. Even if we have one bad season, you can learn from that and come back stronger. So I think it's ridiculous to say that he can't do much more than this. We can end up winning a trophy this season and being in the Champions League. I mean, it's quite a reactionary view to see a draw with Sassuolo and then talk about replacing the coach. But hell, this is what football's like, I suppose. Anyway, that's my Inzaghi rant over. Like I say, look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Inzaghi is punching above his weight, really, most of the time. This is, if you're going on wage bills, the things that really make clubs tick in terms of what you can spend in the market, what you can pay your players, quality squad and so on. That's your sixth, always, in those. So to be finishing anywhere above sixth is an overachievement, really, by those standards. But anyway, we'll leave that for now. Like I say, I don't think the top four is gone. I do think that this is a very worrying time. I think that we are on the verge of saying goodbye to the Champions League if these performances continue. But we've been in this situation before this season. There have been slumps in form already this season. And sometimes all it can take is one really good result to turn that around. And the Derby win did a lot for us. That kick-started a good run that gave the team, that I believe, the confidence to go and beat Inter as well. And I think that, like I say, there's not much to fear from this Milan team at the moment. They're on a worse run than we are. They've got less confidence than we do. And if that game ends up in a win, then it's all on. We've got a game in hand. So, yeah, let's not give up hope. Look, we're at the start of April. This is the time that the team needs fans more than ever. And it's immensely frustrating for a game like this to happen. We hate games like this, and they're happening too often. There's no way around that, and I hope we've been critical enough about what's happened today, because it wasn't the best by any means. But there's still so much to play for that there's no point giving up hope at this stage. And the extra bonus, of course, like I said at the start, is that only one of those 7 players is actually going to be suspended for the Milan game, which is Milan Badel. So, happy days in that regard as well. Right, I will leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. Please, if you haven't already, give us a follow on social media at Lazio_Lounge on Twitter, and you can search for us on Facebook as well. You can find us as well on YouTube, where more and more things seem to be happening, and Vittorio is heavily involved as well. And also, you can find us on Patreon as well. If you want to support us, help us out in any way, that would be very, very well received by us. We'd be very thankful to you for that. But thanks for listening, and hopefully the next time that we speak to you, we'll be celebrating a happier occasion than tonight. So always, Forza Lazio.